This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joie.
Brought to you by NTT Research. Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joie, and today is Thursday, October 22nd, 2020. And I'm joined by three guests this week. Yes, three guests. I have Kazu Gomi, the president and CEO of NTT Research here. Hi, Kazu. How are you?
Hi. Good to see you, Miriam.
And I have Greg Doeden, who is the IOWN marketing chair. Hi, Greg. How are you?
Good. How are you, Miriam?
I'm excellent. My third guest is Matteo Doni, who will be joining us a little later. I told you last week, folks, that I was going to have a bit of a special show, and I think you'll know why in a second. Those two folks with us today are going to talk about the future of networking. We're going to talk about where networking goes from here, basically. You know, today we have wired networks, wireless networks. Wired networks are kind of defined in terms of state-of-the-art by crazy fiber optics, backhaul, and things like that. And then we have, of course, 5G. But, you know, even when I was in Shenzhen last summer visiting Huawei, there was already talk of 6G. And, of course, we just got LTE on the moon this week. So there is all kinds of interesting topics that I would love to pick your brains on. So, yeah, let's get started. Like, where do you think we're going to be at, say, in 5 years with networking? What are the challenges? What are the things that we're working on now to enable whatever pie in the sky craziness that our imaginations are bringing in?
Yeah, so let me start. Obviously, that the 5 years from now, more pervasive network availabilities around the world. And then you mentioned about moon. I don't think we can get there that quickly, but and a more pervasive and more bandwidth. That's the I think obviously that everybody's thinking about. Now, I think when it comes to it, we just have to have good applications, and I think we definitely are at the stage where 5G is coming into the market, and we have a number of applications being talked about, but within 5 years, I'm sure that those things are really coming into the play, and everybody uses that. So I'm looking forward to that the stage that those applications, the first wave of applications, are certainly embraced in 5 years, and then we will probably start seeing the next wave or third wave or whatever. I would expect something like that.
Yeah, it makes sense. Obviously, we kind of touched on this before we recorded the show on how, 5G is obviously critical and welcome by, I think, pretty much everyone. But it is a little difficult for the average consumer to wrap their heads around. And I think because it's, that chicken and egg problem, we saw that with 4G, right? Where we have all these great applications that 5G has enabled, but the customers, didn't get that right away, and nobody knew at the time when it started where we would go. So with 5G, there's a lot more marketing, and it costs a lot more money to buy devices with 5G right now, especially in a difficult worldwide global economy. So how do we keep the public enthusiastic about things like 6G and fiber to the home and things like that? Thoughts on that, Greg, maybe?
Yeah, I think Kazu started to touch on some of those points. What, he was referring to in terms of application-based models that are really driving consumer adoption.
Right.
When you're looking at what people are doing right now in the COVID situation, you're finding that cloud gaming is increasingly on the rise. So if you have fiber, great, no problem. If you don't have fiber, then 5G and connectivity protocols and connectivity technologies that are coming down the path give you the opportunity to have connectivity with much lower latency. So you're not getting any of the jitter or any of the lag that make gaming difficult, and make it more difficult if you're doing cloud gaming to compete with your friends over the air. So there's some entertainment-based applications that will come into play. that will require maybe a change in how people think of the network, think of how the cloud's used. You'll have more local cloud or edge-based devices that help improve or help reduce the amount of latency that is in the application. Autonomous driving will need the same type of implementation so that you have some processing happening on the car, but the network capable of doing all kinds of processing that feed information back to the car. So I think that as these applications become more robust and become part of an individual's everyday life, then that will drive people to better connectivity like 5G. And since I mentioned COVID a little earlier.
Yeah.
Those of us that have kids, that are sending kids off to school, either K through 12 or university, you're seeing applications like education where if you have just connectivity, fiber or whatever, you can deliver a very two-dimensional learning experience. But when you start improving the type of connectivity that you're going to be able to deliver using technologies like 5G and beyond, that have ultra high reliability, that have lower latency, then one of the things that you're able to do is start providing much more immersive experiences. So not necessarily a two-dimensional learning experience, but like a three-dimensional learning experience.
With like VR, AR, and other experiences for sure.
Yeah.
We know all this. Again, it's been part of the marketing for quite a while, right? So
Right.
On one hand, it's like, I think, people are more acutely aware of this kind of disconnect that existed with 3G and 4G of, build the technology and they will come, right? Like the applications, the innovation, right? We know, as from an engineering perspective, myself as an engineer, I understand what 5G and fiber and even, maybe other technologies that are being worked on will bring to improve that, the potential for applications. And I think my audience is pretty tech savvy. There are a lot of early adopters listening right now, and I think they understand the benefits of 5G, and they do understand that economics are challenging because it's very expensive to deploy new networking technology, whether it be wired or wireless, and even more wired, right? And so they also understand that if the terminals, like the devices, the phones, are going to cost more, and the plans is a little different. I think that it's the carrier's job or the operator's job to kind of like absorb some of that cost, I think. Otherwise, it becomes a problem. But I feel like the bigger challenge is going to be the mainstream. And what I'm curious to hear from you folks is challenges around bringing 5G and the backhaul needed for 5G to really shine. That's I think the challenge right now is we're seeing 5G, but it's not performing better than 4G. And of course it will eventually, but when we did get 4G, it was significantly faster than 3G right from the get-go, even though it killed our batteries, right? That's something that somehow the manufacturers and technologists have solved, and 5G seems to be very good at efficiency right now, even in its first year with the devices that are available. But I think that we're not seeing quite that thing. And there's, of course, all that promise with millimeter wave in general, right? Like not just 5G millimeter wave, but I think millimeter wave in its many forms as we go forward. Like I really believe next NR, right? What we're developing today, what Qualcomm's been working on, Huawei's been working on, is, from an engineering point of view, like tremendous. And I think that it's going to plant foundations for decades of what we can do with wireless, right?
Yeah, certainly those millimeter waves and then and all that, those technology allowed higher bandwidth, and then what that means is more users, more endpoints so that you can cover from the single base stations and all that. But as from the tech point of view, the issue is that it doesn't travel very far. So,
exactly right.
So we need to have more density of base station, which is in a way the troublesome from the infrastructure investment point of view. So yeah, that's the kind of name of the game that we are playing right now. But well, it is what it is. I think that will give more bandwidth. At the end of the day, I think infrastructure's provider's point of view, the future is that more bandwidth and a more affordable price to the end users, and then that will create the new application, like Craig mentioned. So that's what it is. But yeah, it is a bit of. But certainly, this 5G's biggest problem is that I think a density we have to cover with the base stations. So
Right.
eventually, my personal opinion, more application. So this is definitely a chicken and egg, and more
Yeah.
applications are, flourishing. More people use, and then that should cover. That will, justify the business model moving forward from there. So how to kind of go over this initial part of this chicken and egg problem? But once that is, overcome, the rest is should be easier. But I think when I look at the situations, I think most of the infrastructure providers are understanding this nature of it, and
Yeah. Yeah.
most of them are kind of embracing this thing. And then let's just get going. Let's just make an investment. Yeah, I see a lot of TV commercials that we have the biggest coverage of the 5G. So yes, that's a good spirit, I think, for to overcome this issue.
Yeah. So, and we're talking right now, we're just talking about the consumer market, right? So if you look at industrial IoT and you look at industrial applications for,
And V2V as well. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, these types of technologies are really where 5G shines. And you talk to a lot of companies and enterprise entities that are interested in local 5G for a number of reasons, being able to have better control over their data, for example.
I mean, I think it's going to revolutionize robotics. Like, I think,
oh, absolutely,
like setting up a factory today is a nightmare because of wired connectivity. And
Mhm.
if you have low latency, connectivity, that solves the whole problem, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that also helps contribute to, what Kazu was talking about in terms of the price curve, right? So if you didn't have a model that was going to enable industrial applications and enterprise applications, and you're relying all on consumer, which wasn't the case with 4G either, you'd have different price curves. But as you're rolling this out to address not just communication issues, but all kinds of connectivity issues for more data-centric computing, then you do change the pricing model and you make it possible to deploy 5G and beyond networks that leverage technologies like, future technologies like silicon photonics and the like to provide pipes that, are capable of carrying much larger data buckets, with much more reduced latency and at a higher reliability.
I appreciate that you were kind of steering in the direction I was going there. That's awesome. Actually, it's interesting because, this is a consumer podcast. Obviously, my audience is consumers mostly, but I have lots of engineers and scientists listening too. And obviously, they're interested in hearing about what is going to be happening beyond consumer for these networking technologies. And I think optical technologies for transmitting data and connectivity and networking in general, just like there is with millimeter wave, incredible potential and growth in the next few decades. I think aren't we just scratching the surface of what we can do with optics right now?
Yeah, you can say that. Optics, certainly it has, well, over the years that the speed of adding bandwidth on the single fiber optics is just tremendous. And then we reached to close to the terabit of the capacity we can certainly carry, but we can probably do a little more. And then the beauty of the fiber optics is that just each single fiber optics is like a whole space of for the wireless. So if you can add more fibers and then you can shove in more bits into the fiber, that's and then if you cannot shove in more bits in the fiber, you can get another fiber physically.
Right.
So
Yes.
It's easier to add the bandwidth. So that's obviously I think everybody understands the nature of it. But at this point, that we are looking at, what's the next stage for the fiber optics, and not just adding a fiber. And again, this is not necessarily new, but you can add more wavelength into the single fibers. So
Right.
that's another way to shove in more bits into that to the fiber. So we're looking at with the silicon photonics technologies coming into the picture as well. And so we can certainly get to the points that if you have a very specific need for the low latencies and high bandwidth, we can allocate end to end, say, the one wavelength for you. And then you can get the just amazing, enormous amount of bits and bandwidth that you can get. And then you can certainly achieve a very, very super low latency, uh, with regard to the one end of the fiber to the other end of the fiber. It could be
Right.
thousands and thousands of miles. Super low latency transmission lines that you can create. So those are the things that we are certainly aiming at. And so now, 5G is typically just for the wireless portion, but the backhaul is certainly, it makes a difference as well when you talk about the end-to-end application performance and so on. So
For
those
sure.
are actually coming in, and many technology companies like NTT and Intel working together and with other partners towards that direction.
That's fantastic. We'll talk a little bit more about what NTT Research and IOWN are bringing to the table, but I would love to hear your thought on a problem that I think we being the audience listening, we all are concerned about right now, which is the kind of like rural internet, like bringing the internet to everyone in the world. Whether it be developed countries like the U.S. or in other parts of the world where the budgets are much different, right? So how do we make that happen? Because, obviously every time we think of a cable of some kind or a wire or a fiber, you have to worry about, incredible costs to deploy that technology, especially on distances like the country of the United States, right? We have, it's a lot of money to bring out fiber to the middle of the desert for maybe a population of 100 people or 1,000 people. So, obviously wireless, immediately you think in your head, well, wireless can solve this. Millimeter wave, microwaves have been around forever as a backhaul tool. And of course, we do not need the kind of density, a number of devices on the network in these locations as we do in the middle of a stadium, right? So there are technologies at scale to facilitate that, but it still seems to be like an obstacle. I think some of it is political, some of it is marketing. How do you solve this? Because I think as engineers, scientists, folks in this industry, we all want what's best for the entire world, which is that everyone be connected and have access to knowledge, education, and communication, right? So how do we fix this? What are the technologies you think that could come along that could be like, okay, this is going to really crank things up to the next level for this kind of problem solving?
I think that the problem you just put on table is actually a very big problem, right? That technology certainly is one aspect we can solve, and then yeah, as you mentioned, that the type of technology everybody thinks of to solve this problem is that the wireless approach, which is much cheaper to deploy that
Right.
the bandwidth, but in reality, that is just one part of the equations. Certainly, there are so many, like you mentioned, the political thing, and I think the biggest hurdle is the business model, that the economy, who's going to pay for it, and then
Yeah,
what,
right.
and then when it comes to that, certainly that I don't know what's the right way to say it, but the standard of living so different in that part of the world, most likely. And so that type of application, I think I say people in the United States enjoy, may not be there, may not be
No,
applicable
for
for
sure.
those people.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
therefore, the usage level is quite different from US to there, kind of thing. But I'm kind of thinking a little bit different way. More connected world. And then also when you think about that, global warmings and everything, the people are worrying about, well, we need a little more dense sensor systems around the world. And I'm not the environmentalist, but I'm sure that there are some impact there, that in the middle of the desert, that we should measure something and that we should get something.
Yes.
So
we should measure everything.
And we should measure everything. And then, again, technology wise, it's doable. So something I'm just kind of making up here because you just mentioned it, but to justify some of those business model, we can put more sensory systems around the globe, and then we need to connect them around, and that's one way to certainly justify, or it could be justifiable of investments and all that. And so that's my kind of sort of thinking process now to this problem. But it is. I think the biggest thing is how to support those investment. We definitely need the initial investment, and which, no matter which technology you use, it's not going to be cheap. So
no, for sure, right?
Yeah,
there's nothing we can do.
Yeah, some seed money that we have to justify, and one of the thing is that how to protect the whole Earth and that kind of thing is one, I think, interesting idea to do.
No, that I think is absolutely critical. I mean, we have to worry about conserving our resources, and we have to worry about the environment as we develop these technologies. And, and we have to think about how it affects people as well. And we can't always predict these things, but I think it's really important. And I'm glad to hear that, you guys are already thinking about this stuff. Craig, maybe you can answer this question.
Shoot.
Are there any things that wireless cannot do yet that you think need to be solved with maybe 6G or whatever the next? Are we starting to see things that we know don't exist in our 5G standards today that we're dreaming up that could even bring on some more craziness in the future? Like, I'm sure that when 4G was being rolled out 10 years ago, Qualcomm was already working on millimeter wave in some way or another. Right? So is there anything like that you guys are aware of as the futurists of networking?
Well, NTT R&D recently had an R&D summit. I think it was like 2 weeks ago. And some of the, conversational topics that surfaced were next generation encryption technologies, for protecting privacy, different use cases around quantum computing and the like. That's not directly related to 5G or 6G or whatever. I think when I look at 5G, I look at it more as kind of a starting point.
Right.
So you're starting to deliver. You're at the level where you have the ability to deliver fat enough pipe, low enough latency, high enough reliability, so that you're starting to introduce different kinds of use cases. And I've talked a little bit about some of the industrial and some of the consumer ones. I think as you have component technologies come into play, better lasers, whatever it is that you're using on the infrastructure level to deliver kind of backhaul to capabilities, also different ways of deploying and using cloud technologies, whether it's a local cloud or a server farm. Those will change the way in which the network capabilities are utilized, and that will help prioritize what types of features network technology providers, companies like Intel, Broadcom, Qualcomm, whomever, and then network service providers, companies like NTT and the like, will need to deliver to customers, and that will define, what goes into, say, the 6G bucket. So,
right,
one of the main things that you hear about is, how are we going to improve the data capabilities of the network? And, with 6G, you're expecting that you'll have even higher data capabilities than you do with 5G.
Yes.
We're focused, if you're looking at, the work that IOWN is doing, we're focusing on developing an all photonics network by 2030. And the reason for that, and Kazu touched on it a little bit, there's all kinds of stuff that you can do with a network. The network itself can become a sensor device, and it can help in doing things like predicting earthquakes, and who knows, you might even be able to use it for contact tracing at some levels. And
cool.
There's a number of different standards organizations that are working on this problem. But I think it becomes kind of the marriage of, what are the core technologies that are enabling the fatter pipe with lower latency? What are the use cases either at the consumer level? Autonomous driving gets thrown around a lot. Robotics gets introduced a lot into this conversation. What are the advancements that we're going to see in those use cases that are really going to drive how the network is being used? And I think, as I already mentioned, that will help in determining the prioritization around what it is that we focus on.
Great.
I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that was a very, very cool answer. And actually touches on something I was going to ask you really quickly. We, to kind of conclude our conversations, Kazu, if I met you in an elevator and you had to tell me what you do, tell me about NTT Research, what would you say in 10 seconds?
Yeah, so we are defining the future or creating a future, I would like to say. What our word is upgrade the reality. We just upgrade
Nice.
the future. Yeah, that's what we do. And network is certainly one of the core to make it happen.
And Craig, how would you tell me about IOWN in 10 seconds in an elevator?
We're trying to figure out what the requirements are for today and tomorrow so that we can build a network and network technologies that will be able to support multi-point data-centric computing in the network.
Awesome. Well, folks, thanks so much for being on the show, and thanks to NTT Research for sponsoring the show. NTT Research is a Silicon Valley organization that conducts fundamental research and advances technologies that promote positive change for humankind. The organization focuses its research in 3 areas: quantum information, neuroscience and photonics, cryptographic and information security, medical and health informatics. NTT Research is part of NTT, a global technology and business solution provider. In January 2020, NTT, Intel, and Sony founded the Innovative Optical and Wireless Network Global Forum, IOWN. IOWN's objective is to accelerate innovation and adoption of a new communication infrastructure to meet our future data and computing requirements through the development of new technologies, frameworks, specifications, and reference design in areas such as photonics, R&D, distributed connected computing, and use cases, as well as best practices. And so I'm now joined by Matteo Doni. Hi, Matteo. How are you?
Very well, thanks. How are you, Miriam?
I'm well. What did you think of that? That was an interesting future of networking brainstorm.
It's a real teaser. As a technology enthusiast, I'm really excited about how quickly and how many cat pictures I'll be able to share very soon.
I mean, that's always what it comes down to, right? Ultimately, it's about cat pictures. So, hey, we've got some news items to talk about to round up the rest of the show. We've got some reviews to talk about. Apple stuff, obviously. Maybe let's start with that. Like the iPhone reviews are out, at least the 2 middle iPhones. Not the iPhone 12 mini, not the iPhone 12 Maxi, as I've been calling it, which is the Pro Max, which has the crazy camera system. And I want to touch on that a little bit because we didn't talk about the camera system last week. And so you and I, camera nerds, we're going to be talking about cameras with regards to the Mate 40 as well. So what's your quick general take on these reviews? Obviously, I don't have the phone, you don't have the phone, but you've read the reviews. Is it pretty much what you expected?
Yes, it's what I've expected, but what worries me is the relatively short amount of time the reviewers have had with the devices. I hope that they've put the devices through the right paces, but those cameras are a key feature in today's smartphones. And how much better are they than the previous generation? iPhone has always been a really easy camera for the average user to be able to take easy snapshots and performs really, really well in that context. Is it going to be competitive in the market, though, with other brands coming along with stronger ones? Obviously, the resolution in terms of megapixels, we know that that's not important. But there's been no major upgrade there compared to previous generations. What I am interested in is seeing Apple catching up in computational photography and how that's going to work out with things like portrait mode, night mode, where they have lagged compared to, say, Google, Huawei, and even Xiaomi to a certain extent in the same price range.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we'll see what happens. But the initial reviews seem to be very positive. They're not groundbreaking devices. These are the middle ground ones. But for most consumers, these are the devices to go to if they can, the consumers can afford them, which in this day and age is actually a serious concern for these consumer electronics companies.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I mean, look, it's pretty much what I expected. I'll be honest. It's nice to see. There's a few things that stood out, but it's nice to see, generally speaking, that Apple's pushing forward and that this is a bit more of an upgrade than I expected in some ways. I mean, beyond the 5G hype, which I'm over. You're over. You're getting a different phone than us in your market anyway. We're all getting millimeter wave capable phones, which cost more and are more complex. But it's true. Like, look, millimeter wave. It sounds like that pie in the sky thing, but once you have it and you try it, it's nice to have. I think it's not going to be the kind of thing you use walking down the street or in your office or home, unless you have like fixed 5G networking as your main ISP at home. But I think it's going to be the big differentiator once we're back in stadiums, in concert venues, at airports, in like terminals, where we're constantly line of sight of these tiny picocells, right? I think that's when it's going to kick serious ass. And I'm looking forward to that. And you know, it's important, obviously, in the US because Verizon is, just finally rolled out their sub-6 5G network. So they're no longer just strapped onto a millimeter wave. But at the same time, all three carriers have millimeter wave here, right? We only have three now. Sprint has been absorbed by T-Mobile. So we have millimeter wave, very, very little bit of it on AT&T and T-Mobile. And relatively speaking, still very little bit still, but more with Verizon. So I think it's important, but it's not what I mean when I say the iPhone stands out as a bit more of an upgrade than I expected. What I mean is that, it seems that they've done their work with the cameras, for example, f/1.6 on all the lenses, which is a pretty big deal. Bigger sensors as well, more sensitivity for the main camera. I also feel like the industrial design is tops. Like I always felt like I think the iPhone 4 and 4S were the pinnacle. The proportions on that phone, like that was Steve Jobs at his best and probably his worst for the people who work for him, right? Because he really made the phone an object of jewelry. Like it feels like that was the first time we saw a phone. It wasn't the first time we saw a phone with metal construction or glass. It was the first time that we saw a phone that pulled it off in a cohesive, coherent, one kind of design like that as iconic and still stands out today. I still feel the 5S, and SE, the original SE, are kind of frumpy in comparison. They just don't do it for me as much. They're thinner, yeah. But the whole aluminum back with the top window at the bottom and the top is just not as refined to me, not as sleek, and slick.
True. Where the 4 and the 4S, the iPhone 4 and 4S stood out was the Retina display. At the time, it was really quite a thing.
And that, yes, as well.
But as a developer, I have to say the iPhone 5, the 5 SE, and more importantly, the 5C were the real groundbreaker because we moved away from the previous Apple aspect ratio and resolution and moved up a notch in terms of having a longer screen and being able to have more screen real estate to add features or pretty things.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was needed for sure, but I feel like the proportions of the 4 were better. Like, I don't know how to explain it, and I feel that those proportions are back with the 12 and the 12 Pro. And I think specifically those two because this is the thing that blew me away. They're exactly the same dimensions. The cases for the 12, which is aluminum frame, and the 12 Pro, which is stainless steel frame, are identical. The measurements down to the millimeter are identical, and the screen sizes, of course, are identical.
Yes, and more importantly, this is where we don't have the iPhone 12 previously the iPhone 11 and the XR, being the sort of substandards cousins of the real iPhones in terms of screen technology and resolution. What I will do think will make a big difference, especially for those who get to see the devices in person, is having an AMOLED screen and a higher resolution screen. That's going to be the real differentiator that will sell more iPhone 12s, despite the rest of the specifications not being that big much of an upgrade.
I think so too. I think it's kind of interesting that you're deciding right now between camera systems, mostly. Everything else is pretty much end materials in terms of the, some people like the frosted glass better. That's on the back of the 12 Pro. Some people like the glossy that's on the back of the 12 better. Some might prefer the fingerprint happy stainless steel. Some people might prefer the aluminum. I think I'm on camp anodized aluminum personally, if I have to choose. But yeah, look, I think overall, I think this is a solid upgrade. I'm more interested in finding out what happens with the iPhone 12 mini and what happens with the iPhone 12 Maxi, as I've been calling the Pro Max. And actually, let's talk about the imaging sensor on that, because I forgot about bringing that up last week's podcast. So you saw the specs. This is the first phone that I'm aware of anywhere that has sensor-based OIS instead of lens-based OIS. So it's not actually optical, it's sensor IS. And that's something that we've only seen on cameras so far. Like, instead of the lens moving to compensate for your hands shaking, the sensor is moving and the lens is fixed. And that's actually a better way to do it, really. It's just very complicated and expensive. And it's kind of impressive to me that they pulled it off, right?
Yes, what in the camera world we call in-body stabilization.
Correct.
Has come to the smartphone camera with sensor stabilization. That's going to be exciting as well, especially as it's going to be paired with that computational photography, where Apple have promised us they're catching up or they're improving compared to the competition.
Yeah, I think the other thing that also stood out for me with the 12 Maxi is the bigger sensor, much bigger sensor. Now, I don't think it's quite Samsung Galaxy, Note 20 Ultra big, but I just looked it up, and it's actually the big difference between that specific sensor to the 12 Pro Max is it's 1.7 micron versus 1.4 micron pixel size for the others, and in addition to the sensor stabilization, right?
Yes, and let's see how computational photography works into that. The average user won't be as excited about this as we are in terms of cameras, but I'm sure that we'll start seeing our friends and family on Instagram being able to take better pictures, we hope.
I mean, remember, it's not just about friends and family. The audience listening here, they really want to know.
True.
Like, we're all the camera nerds listening right now. I'm just excited to see that for the first time in a long time, the biggest phone has some differences in cameras, right? Which we initially got with the Plus series when it was the first to adopt OIS and the first to get a second lens, remember back in the day?
Yes. So in a way, Apple have reinvented Huawei's strategy with their flagships or their flagship series.
Yeah. I mean, in some way they have. Speaking of, before we jump into Huawei and the Mate 40 real quickly, do you have any thoughts? I didn't put this in the notes, but it kind of makes sense to bring it up. Any thoughts on these iPad Air reviews that are popping up? Basically, the gist is that, to me at least, the summary is that why buy an iPad Pro until they update it? Right now, the iPad Air is the iPad Pro.
Yes, there are rumors of an upcoming Apple event in November, just before Christmas.
That's right. November 17th is the rumor.
But the iPad Air seems to be everything you need from an iPad, even compared to the previous iPad Pros.
Yeah.
And for most consumers, let's face it, the iPad Air is more than they'll most likely use, especially with the recently refreshed standard iPad, the iPad 2020.
Indeed, yes. I'm excited. I mean, I was thinking of buying an iPad Air. I might still do that. But I'm excited that we finally have a cheaper alternative to the Pro, which has better specs than the Pro right now in many ways. But that kind of thing shows where Apple is going. And what I'm most excited about, as you mentioned, is this Apple event on November 17th, which is a rumor right now. But that might be the event that they launch the new Apple Silicon-based Macs. So that would be fantastic.
That's going to be really exciting from a pure technology standpoint, how they're moving a desktop platform to ARM. Developers will be terrified when these sort of shifts happen. It's a worry, but I'm sure that in the long run, everyone will adapt, and it will be a good thing.
Yeah, no, I think so. So shall we talk about the crazy Mate 40 series? I also want to quickly say to the audience listening that I finally published my unboxing of the Huawei P40 Pro Plus. I unboxed this thing back in July, so I'm just behind. So I finally published that video. If you want to see what that looks like close up, and you want to see what it looks like compared to a P40 Pro regular, watch my unboxing video. I will link it in the show notes. So Mate 40 Pro and Pro Plus and Pro regular. What is your take?
This is exactly what we were expecting from Huawei, is their talk in the TikTok flagship product series launches for the year. So it's the new Kirin 9000 chipset, the flagship chipset.
5 nanometer, right?
5 nanometer and 5G. That's 2 5s.
2 5s.
And that's going to be the flagship chipset that will power Huawei phones for the foreseeable future, providing the current trade war doesn't impair them from the possibility of supplying those chips from fabricators. Apart from that, we're looking again at some pretty amazing camera setups. Huawei threw the kitchen sink at them again, with a 50 megapixel main sensor, with 12 megapixel wide-angle lenses. There's a standard telephoto, 12 megapixel telephoto, and 20 megapixel ultra-wide sensors. So really amazing camera setups. But the Mate 40 Pro Plus brings a time-of-flight 3D sensor, which will improve our selfies and portrait shots even more, depending on how you hold the phone. And again, periscope telephoto lens for that extra zoom. On the Mate 40 Pro Plus, that's a 10 times optical zoom, whereas the normal Mate 40 Pro has the 12 megapixel telephoto periscope lens. Only 5 times optical zoom from a 12 megapixel periscope lens, which is just bonkers.
Only.
A few years ago, this was science fiction, and now it's quite common.
Yeah, I think I feel like this is a very much an echo of what we saw in the P40 specs, right? Like the regular one is kind of a down-tuned version of the Pro, and then the Pro Plus is just like cranking it up to 11 with the dual telephotos, right? And so I think I'm excited about that. But there's one thing that's making me scratch my head, and I haven't found an answer yet. So if you're listening to the show, please hit me up on Twitter and let me know, because I'm curious, is anybody's caught this little detail? The ultra-wides on the Pro and the Pro Plus, and the Mate 40 Pro and Pro Plus, is only 20 megapixels this time, instead of 40, I believe it was, on the P40 Pro and the Mate 30 Pro. So, and there are rumors that it might be an RYYB sensor, which would be a first for an ultra-wide, but I'm not sure. So, yeah, what do you think?
I'm quite excited about that. The wide-angle lenses on the Huawei Mate and P series cameras are always quite good. They don't have too much distortion at the edges of the pictures.
I mean, I felt that, to me, that's what the thing was about the Mate 30 Pro and the P40 Pro and P40 Plus as well, was that this wasn't just a 40 megapixel sensor. It was pixel binning on an ultra-wide at 4:1, outputting 10 megapixel. That is bonkers. That means low light, especially with a fast lens. It means kind of incredible performance. And so I'm a little surprised that they would have gotten rid of that, you know?
Yeah, so they've dropped down to the 20 megapixel. How that works, I'm not sure. I want to see that in person. Who knows? Maybe their computational photography or the Leica tuning they have for their cameras has removed the need for 40 megapixel sensor. maybe the 20 megapixel one is bigger pixels.
I think for me, it's more a question of if this is an RYYB sensor, I'm on board. It's basically the same as pixel binning at that point in terms of low light performance. But if it's just a regular sensor, unless the pixel sizes are larger, which we don't know right now, I think it's a step backwards. And I really hope they didn't do that. They didn't step backwards,
Yes. Well, we'll need to see. And more importantly, we'll need to see how available these devices are outside of the home market in China.
The other thing that I noticed, and this could be a typo because I'm relying on GSM Arena, the awesome folks over there keeping a really detailed database of phones. But the other noticing detail is that we have that 20 megapixel ultra wide on the Mate 40 Pro is f/1.8, which is the same as the 40 megapixel was on the P40 and Mate 30, right? But when I go to the Pro Plus, the Mate 40 Pro Plus, it says the ultra wide is f/2.4, which is weird that they would have a separate lens. Maybe they're just saving a bit of money there, but that means to me we're going to get worse low light performance on the ultra wide of the Mate 40 Pro Plus than we're going to get on the ultra wide for the Mate 40 Pro. And that worries me a bit. I won't lie.
I can confirm that according to Huawei's own website, that's 20 megapixel with f/2.4.
On the Mate 40 Pro Plus?
Yes.
And what about the Mate 40 Pro regular?
It's f/1.8.
Yeah, so they did. See, they did that. They cheapened out a little. So I'm just a little worried about that. I mean, look, Leica and computational photography is one thing, but you can't go backwards like that. Like, especially when one of the killer features on the P40 series and the Mate 30 series was the ultra wide. Like it's the best ultra wide we've ever seen on any phone. Period. Right?
Yeah, definitely.
So that's the only thing that's kind of making me scratch my head. I mean, obviously the chip is going to be more efficient and faster. That's going to be great. It might be the last Kirin chip we see ever, which is kind of scary, but it also has crazy charging speed, 66 watt wired charging and 50 watt wireless charging. Wow, right?
And if there's ever a phone you will be able to cook an egg on after it's finished wirelessly charging, I think the Mate 40 Pro might be the one. How they're doing wireless charging at that speed is amazing. And I'm worried about the heat dissipation issues at that speed.
Yeah, they must have some kind of trick up their sleeve here. I mean, this is one of the things about Huawei. They really know how to do hardware. What's the display situation here? I see that the basic Mate 40 doesn't have has a single punch hole cutout, and then the pill-shaped cutout for the other two, meaning there's probably a time-of-flight sensor. Yeah, there is for the selfie as well. But is this a waterfall display in the same crazy way as the waterfall display was in the Mate 30? Because I see a volume rocker now, so I feel like we're back to physical buttons, right?
We see physical buttons on both the Mate 40 Pro Plus and the Mate 40 Pro. It looks as if the waterfall display on the Mate 40 Pro Plus is a little bit more accentuated. I haven't seen the device in person, so I can't say. But it seems that in the press images that I've been provided with, the Mate 40 Pro, you can see the buttons at the side, whereas the Mate 40 Pro Plus has them slightly recessed to the back to make space for the waterfall display. A bit like we saw in the Mate 30 Pro last year and the P40 Pro Plus this year.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it looks like to me. I'm going to link to Marquez's video on the Mate 40 Pro. I believe he's got a video out. I haven't watched it yet. My device is on the way, but I don't have it yet. So some people have received their devices. In this case, MKBHD did a video. I am hoping to get my device in the next few days. So stay tuned. I'll have an unboxing video as soon as I get my hands on it. I'm super excited about this. I still am scratching my head a little bit about some of these camera decisions here. It seems to me that we are finally at a stage where we might have reached peak Huawei with the P40 Pro Plus.
Indeed. Then again, you and I are currently without a device. We're not able to physically play with it. But on paper, and according to what we saw in the presentation, Huawei have, again, topped their flagship series. But I think it's not just about the phones. Huawei were quite heavily involved in accessories with this launch as well.
Oh, yeah. Talk about that.
Yeah, so obviously the Huawei Mate 40 Pro and 40 Pro Plus have insane 66 watt fast charging. So this is the same, it's actually 1 watt faster than my laptop charges at over USB Type-C. So the phone can charge faster than that. And they have a power bank that charges just as fast at 66 watts.
Wow.
A power bank, a lithium battery, outputting that power over a cable it's amazing to me. This is the sort of science fiction we were looking at years ago. It's happening. It's here. It's now.
Uh-huh.
So I'm excited about that. But as a selfie professional, I have to say the case they launched with the Mate 40 Pro Plus is the absolute winner. So it's a normal case with a selfie ring light recessed around the camera module when the case is in normal mode. And that selfie ring light flips forward to act as a ring light for your selfies. So this is really revolutionary for selfies. So much for having a separate accessory you carry separately. This is a case with the ring light built in.
Yeah. No, this is exciting. I mean, I know you're the selfie king, so I think this makes sense that it would get you super excited. I think it's cool. I feel like accessories are fun, and I just don't want to pay for them, you know? It's like,
True.
I wouldn't go out of my way to buy them, but I think I appreciate that people would, right?
But the good news is both you and I know that within 3 to 4 weeks on AliExpress, you can go out and buy a compatible version or a similar case made for any other smartphone on the market.
Indeed.
So my only hope is that next generation they improve on this selfie ring light case by including a Mocadial option. I was a bit disappointed it wasn't Mocadial.
Oh, damn. Matteo, why?
I have to accessorize with my shoes.
I know. Why? Well, you need to get that case custom made for Matteo, right?
Thank you. I need to accessorize with my Mocadial shoes. As a Frenchwoman, you'll understand. I
totally understand. No, absolutely. Essential. A couple of more things before we sign off. I reviewed the OnePlus Buds Z from OnePlus. They were announced at the same time as the OnePlus 8 last October 14th. And we didn't get our review units in time for the embargo on 14th. So they sent us the devices like earlier this week. I've had mine for a couple of days. I wrote a quick review based on, as you know, my background in audio is pretty extensive. It's pretty easy for me to make a good decision as to the sound quality of a product quickly early on. I'm impressed overall. I feel like $49 US. The reality is this: you can buy true wireless earbuds all day long on Amazon or Ali or whatever that are even cheaper than that, $29, whatever. But they all come from these no-name, you've never heard of, you can't really trust brands. And honestly, most of them sound like crap, and performance is not really there. There's lots of chipsets available today from Qualcomm and MediaTek and whatever that allow true wireless earbuds to be made, and there's a proliferation of them. But if you're looking for something that you can rely on, that's a brand name, that's something, it's really hard to find something good for less than $100. Definitely harder for less than $50. So, the OnePlus Buds Z at $50, $49. Really hit the mark. They're not the best sounding earbuds that I have by a long shot for true wireless. They are not horrible though. They're decent sounding. They're bass heavy, which is not my thing, but if you're looking for bass heavy, they are your ticket. I feel that the high end, the trebles are a little too soft for me. I feel that I would like a little more crispiness and definition in that area for the cymbals and stuff to sound better. But the mids are lovely. The voices sound wonderful. Imaging is good. So they sound pretty damn decent for $50. And everything else about them is solid battery life, all that. They're water resistant. You get all the goodness. You don't get wireless charging at this price, but USB Type-C, etc., etc. So my reviews on geekspin.co. Check it out. I'll link it in the show notes. I also have an unboxing video in the show notes. Check it out. The last thing I want to say about that before I ask you what your thoughts are on where OnePlus is headed with things is that I wanted to mention that compared to the OnePlus Buds non-Z, which those cost $79, which were my favorite up to now. And now currently, by the way, on sale in the US for $59. So the price difference between the Buds Original and the Buds Z is now $10. I think the Buds Regular are a better product. I think that obviously they're meant to be $30 more originally. But sound quality wise, I feel that they sound better. Actually, to me, they're one of the best sounding under $100 branded true wireless earbuds, the regular OnePlus Buds. And that remains the case. The Buds Z have not dethroned them. But I think that the reason this is a very delicate subject is because the Buds Regular are like AirPods. They don't fit everybody's ear well. They are universal fit, which is a problem for people with big or small ears. They can be uncomfortable. They can fall off your ear. And the sound quality is highly dependent on how well they fit you. So they fit me perfectly and the sound quality is really good for me, but that's not necessarily the case for you. With the Buds Z, which are cheaper, because they have silicone tips, even though the sound quality is a little lower, in my opinion, you get a more consistent fit, right? And you can adjust the size of the tips. They come with 3 sizes, and you can get something that stays in your ear, feels comfortable to you, and the sound quality should be the same for everyone because of this consistency in being able to have good fit. So that's the thing you have to think about when you talk about true wireless earbuds. Your take, Matteo.
I can't judge the OnePlus audio products because I haven't had the chance to play with them. But I have to say the recent move since Apple went for the AirPods Pro, having those silicon tips and being able to serve more customers, I think this has also improved the quality of audio most people are listening to. By having those closed off ear canals, you don't have to have as high a volume, there's less distortion, and you're less affected by outside noise.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very important to point that out because I think that the environmental effect, like the passive noise isolation, is very much a thing with these silicon tips. You don't get that at all with the other design. Yeah,
I that's what's really important to me. And so since long before the AirPods Pro, I was propense to choosing those. And I have to say, there's the market as a whole is really interesting at the moment. Huawei have their own earbuds, the Pro model with the silicon tips with excellent active noise cancellation. And I've also had the chance to use the LG Tone FN6 earbuds. Mm-hmm. They probably are the ones that you would like in terms of it's a much crisper, less bassy sound. It's tuned by Meridian, and it's very, very good quality. So if you're listening to your cheesy pop music like Jennifer Page, you won't get that crushy bass in the background. Right. But if you're listening to audiobooks, for example, on Audible in high definition, in the high quality setting, the sound is surprisingly good. And listening to good quality podcasts like the Mobile Tech Podcast, which is lovingly edited, you actually notice that difference in audio compared to, say, the Tech Travel Geeks podcast.
Thanks, Matteo. You're too kind. I don't think your podcast sounds awful either. I mean, come on.
Yes, well, I haven't. Sadly, our friend Vlad Savov gave me podcast editing block after we recorded a 3.5-hour podcast. So people can listen to that podcast or watch it on YouTube, but I haven't got round to editing it yet.
Well, it'll come. Look, I think true wireless earbuds are a thing. They're good now. They're there. They're here to stay. I use my OnePlus Buds, not the Z, the previous model, as my kind of go-to. I want to quickly listen to something while I'm walking to the store sort of thing, like casual listening. And I think for that, they've revolutionized the way we do things, and they're certainly not to be dismissed. I don't really care about the design. I just want the best sound, and that's why I prefer the Buds Regular over the Buds Z, because even though the Buds Z has silicone tips, which technically should make them better, just the drivers aren't as good. And of course, you get what you pay for. But fit is an issue with the other design. And of course, to be clear, these don't have ANC or anything. They have some noise canceling for the phone calls, like, noise suppression and basic management, and they sound fine for calls. It's just more like I'm talking about, you can't compare AirPods Pro with, $50 OnePlus Buds Z. But if you do compare them, you'd be surprised at how well those OnePlus Buds perform, actually. So I've never been super impressed with the sound quality of AirPods and AirPods Pro in my world. There are better out there for less, like, in my opinion, the OnePlus Buds regular. But assuming they fit you, which is a big assumption to make, and assuming you're wearing them properly, which is also a big assumption to make, because we all have different ears. I do want to wrap up with one quick thing, because we do have to end this action-packed show. The Vivo X50 Pro, which I finally, by the way, published my unboxing videos, the same as the P40 Pro Plus, where I unboxed it months ago and never got around to publishing the video. So check out the link in the show notes. That phone has been recycled by Vivo into the X51 5G and is now being sold in Europe. This is the first time Vivo's come to Europe. Are you excited about that, Matteo?
I am, yes, because every time I've been to China over the last few years, I've been amazed by the apparent value the Vivo smartphones offer, their color ranges, and sometimes the crazy camera setups Vivo have. Outside of China, I really had never heard of Vivo apart from tech demos, such as the ones we saw at GSMA and Mobile World Congress. But it's good to see Vivo come in. They're part of BKK, so the same parent company as Oppo, OnePlus. So it will be probably addressing a slightly different market segment, but they're in Europe now, and especially in a time when people are maybe a bit more price sensitive with the job situation, the economy.
Exactly.
Vivo is going to probably do very, very well, and sadly take market from some of the incumbents like LG and others.
I think so. Look, I mean, if I have to look at all the phones I played with this year, to me, the Vivo X50 Pro, which is the same as the X51 5G in Europe, is my second favorite camera phone after the P40 Pro Plus, because it's the only other camera phone I have that has dual telephoto lenses. It has a 2x and a 5x optical periscope. And on top of that, that crazy gimbal main cam, which is the most stable thing I've ever used. It's not super great for video, believe it or not. Like, there's some software tuning still needed to make video, the gimbal really work well for video. But for still photography, that gimbal basically turns, you can literally shake the phone up and down like a half an inch in each direction without noticing anything in the viewfinder. It's crazy.
Less blurry cat photos then.
Absolutely. Most important thing. So yeah, I'm excited about that. The last thing I want to talk about is something called LTE on the moon. We kind of touched on it with my friends over from NTT Research, but this is a thing. When we get to the moon, supposedly in 2024, they're going to need to communicate with one another up there. And Nokia is partnering with NASA to bring LTE networking to the moon. Wow.
That's going to be really exciting, and probably it will satisfy the need for more automation or robotics on the moon. Obviously, less human capital, more machines that will need to communicate faster. And it will be interesting to see what bands and frequencies they use for that. There's nothing to ruin. There's nothing else out there as far as we know. So yeah. It may realistically be they could go as low down as 400 megahertz. To get that signal out there. So think of those things. That's really exciting.
I think it's really cool. Like, I mean, you know, I never thought of that. But yeah, once we're up there, we will need some sort of wireless technology. Cellular is probably the way to go. And, you know, yeah. So it's interesting. I think the big challenge for Nokia and NASA and all the companies involved in making this happen, and whoever manufactures the terminal, the device, the phone, the tablets, that they're going to use for that up there is, radiation proof, right? Like, because it messes with electronics big time, right?
Yeah. So silicon may not be the preferred material. Maybe lead might be preferred. But I'm going to be a bit flippant here and say, great, NASA has teamed up with Nokia for 4G on the moon. But let's face it, the Chinese Space Agency and Huawei are going to be launching 8G at the same time. On the moon, just on the other side.
Yeah, on the other side. It's going to be like those crazy films we've seen where people are fighting on the moon.
To stay on Nokia, I have to say, it is challenging times. The world economy is in crisis. We've just been talking about these super amazing high-end phones. I would this week have been really surprised by Nokia's, or HMD Global Nokia's, lower-end device, the new 2 Series one, where for less than £100 or less than $140, you're getting so much smartphone. And it's an Android One device, so it's an almost Google experience for less than $140. Yes, the camera is not the best, but you get a 6.5-inch HD Plus screen, which is not bad. The experience for the price is amazing. And I think that the trickle-down technology that we talk about week in, week out on our podcasts and in our coverage is actually making its way down there. If you compare, say, a $100 smartphone from 5 years ago to a $100 smartphone today, we are living in the future.
Oh, it's night and day. Oh, yeah. It's really amazing. And I think we're seeing that in the mid-range as well. I mean, look, I have a Moto E series, a 2020 version of that on as well. Again, another unboxing video I need to edit and publish. But it's about the same price as this Nokia you're talking about. And honestly, it's a fine phone. There's nothing wrong with it. You know, and with Moto's, this is not an Android One, but it's Moto's pretty streamlined, skin, if you want to call it even a skin. It's almost stock Android. So it's great. Yeah. No, I support that 100%.
If we think about it, you and I have been covering smartphones since the days of resistive Android touchscreen smartphones. Shudder. Nowadays, by those standards, there are no such things as bad phones.
No, it's true. That's been the case, I think, for a little while now, too. Well, listen, we need to wrap up. So, Matteo, do you want to tell folks where they can find you on the internet, your various social media handles and all that good stuff?
Sure. So on Twitter and Instagram, I'm Todoleo. That's Tango Oscar Delta Oscar Lima Echo Oscar. That's my handle. And they can follow the Tech Travel Geeks YouTube channel. Just search for Tech Travel Geeks and you'll see not only smartphone coverage, tablet coverage, laptop coverage, but on Sundays, we tend to do drone videos, so videos filmed with our drones in Edinburgh and vicinity.
Cool.
And our Chief Aperture Officer, Lukash, has recently opened up his Oculus Quest and is going to be doing some in-depth reviewing of that, so VR as well.
Nice.
So that's where to find me on the internet. How about you, Miriam?
Well, folks, you all know where to find me on the internet. I'm at Tank Girl on Twitter and Instagram. That's like the comic book character Tank Girl, but without the vowels. So you should drop the vowels. TNKGRL. Twitter is where you want to hit me up for discussing this show. Tell me what you think. Tell me whether that Mate 40 has an RYYB ultra-wide 20 megapixel sensor on the Pro and Pro Plus version. I'd be curious. And then on Instagram, you'll find pretty photos of phones and pretty photos taken with phones. That's kind of my MO there. Finally, there's a YouTube channel, of course, that goes with the show, youtube.com/mobiletechpodcast. This is where you'll find some complimentary visuals that go with the show. So check that out. I just, as I mentioned earlier, published a whole bunch of new unboxing videos. There's also like some hands-ons and reviews. In fact, there's a bit of a mini review of these OnePlus Buds Z on there right now. So check that out. And then finally, if you came here first time and you want to subscribe to the podcast, mobiletechpodcast.com is the URL. We're also on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, and Spotify. So you'll find us pretty much everywhere. Good podcasts I've found. Please subscribe, tell your friends, all that good stuff. And if you're subscribed to the podcast, if your app lets you do it, please rate the show and or review the show. It really helps others decide whether they want to listen to the show or not. There's also a donate link in the show notes. If you can help me do this podcast every week, that would be great. Check it out. It's a PayPal link. It's down there. Anything helps. So consider donating. I appreciate it. I also want to thank our sponsor again, NTT Research. We had a really interesting conversation about the future of networking. And Matteo, thanks for being on the show yet again.
Well, thank you for having me. You'll have to join us on the Tech Travel Geeks podcast very soon.
Absolutely. Let's make it happen. Well, folks, that's it. I'll have another show next week, so obviously stay tuned for that. But until then, cheers, everybody.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.